All right, I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you very much, Vita. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some information about the application and tools that the RDNA manages, as well as some additional information that might be helpful for decision making. So as Vita kind of led off, the Wildland Fire Management Research Development and Application Group, we're made up of 20 people who work for Washington Office Fire and Aviation, Rocky Mountain Research Station, Department of Interior, National Park Service, and Office of Wildland Fire. We're very integrated across DOI and USDA agencies, and one of our primary missions is to provide tools and applications for decision support. Decision support is a catch-all phrase. We manage applications to help provide information for fuel treatments, risk assessments, incident decision support, analytical models to help inform incident management. We're considered liaisons with research community and field personnel, providing a conduit to help with knowledge transfer, information sharing, course development, and integration of applications to curriculum or training programs for all levels of the fire organization. This group also, we provide incident support throughout the nation within positions supporting incident management teams, such as strategic planners, long-term analysts, fire behavior analysts, and risk management support. We actively coordinate with research entities internal to the agencies, as well as research affiliates outside of the federal agency, leveraging science and other capabilities and capacities. Some of this work includes, but isn't limited to, artificial intelligence, data sharing, fire behavior modeling, testing platforms for application development, Amazon Web Services, mobile applications, etc. So there's two primary applications that we manage, and that's IFTDIS, the Interagency Fuels Treatment Decision Support System, and WFDIS, the Wildland Fire Decision Support System. I'm going to touch on some of the highlights of both of these applications today, just enough to scratch the surface. These tools can be used for planning efforts, coordination, implementation, and prioritizations. They can provide a conduit to bring your stakeholders together to have conversations around various priorities across the landscape, in addition to bringing entities together to discuss and share priorities that different agencies or entities have put upon them politically or administratively. Not every entity is the same in that there are different driving forces or missions. Some agencies don't have the flexibility to quote unquote manage fires. They have more explicit directions that every fire will be suppressed at the smallest size possible. Or there are different values placed on economics, social political influences, ecological or infrastructure. Talking about and sharing these pre-identified values prior to an event on the landscape is beneficial to all parties and stakeholders. Having a set of tools to help define or portray the landscape in a manner that is wall-to-wall data for evaluations or assessments provides the opportunities to create an environment that is easier to compare or assess the potential impacts. Wildfire knows no boundaries. It burns across ownerships, threatens values, and impacts everyone equally. Using tools or applications to assist with the planning efforts before, during, and post-fire is advantageous for managers. It will help build and maintain those relationships that are so important for all of us to be successful. From a planning side of things, the Interagency Fuels Decision Support System, IFTDIS, is a great set of tools to help initiate discussions around planning efforts, fuel treatments, risk assessments, and values. IFTDIS is being used by many different entities with varying capacities, internal and external to the federal agency. Users are using these tools to provide products and evaluate the potential successes in different fuel treatments can provide on the landscape. Some of the folks that are using this platform are NEPA specialists to write their NEPA specialist reports, to write prescribed fire plans, to implement community wildfire protection plans, quantitative wildfire risk assessments, multi-year fuels planning documentation, hazard analysis, fuel treatment prioritizations, using the MAP interface for public meetings and integration, and fuels and fire behavior training and education. It's being embedded into several university curriculums. With the heavy fire impacts that have occurred in California over the last several years, we have been requested to have conversations with utility companies. They're very interested in using applications or fire behavior modeling to help provide some baseline for planning. They're embracing these conversations and using some of these tools to help depict some of the hazards or prioritizations across all lands that their lands may touch. So to reiterate, the IFTDIS is a powerful tool and application for initiating those discussions, particularly around the cohesive strategy where we're trying to manage all lands, all hands for the benefit of all for managing a fire. Since the launch of the application in 2017, there's a pretty good mix of users. It's being integrated with several of the national courses that are taught for fuels planning, prescribed burning, and it's just taking off with the Fuels Academy that's being stood up within the U.S. Forest Service. There are some other pilot efforts going on with the National Park Service. There's several parks that have stood up to do some pilot work. And then there's other entities that are using the IFDIS application. Some of the academic entities are using IFDIS to reach out to their students to teach them prescribed fire planning, burning opportunities, and do some comparison modeling. So they have exposure to these applications before they get in the field. It's a web-based application to assist with fuels planning, and you can access many tools or capabilities within one web-based application. I've only highlighted a few just to get you thinking of the possibilities. So there's map products. You don't have to be a GIS specialist to be able to use them. They're very intuitive and they're easy to adjust. There's consistent data sources nationally, wall-to-wall data, so everybody gets to use the same back-end data layers when you're comparing treatments across different boundaries or what have you. Everybody can base it off of the same information, which if we remember back when we first started some of the county mitigation planning in the early 2000s, everybody had different data layers. So it was comparing apples to oranges and lemons and limes, and it was really hard to compare how you were going to do fuels treatment and what success really looked like. There's integrated hazard maps, overlay. You can overlay your values at risk that are determined. Some of those are loaded in as a national layer. You can run some of the fire behavior analyses, and then you can export some of the landscape data and fire modeling outputs. And so we've used this platform before when we've had bumps within WFDIS. We've pulled the landscape data out and been able to plug it into WFDIS on that side of things. And then you can compare treatment alternatives and scenarios. And again, just want to say that it is open for anybody and everybody. So we've been trying to really promote this application for anybody that's federal, non-federal to do some of those treatments. And some of those conversations around the utility companies have been, you know, if they want to do some work or implementation, trying to use IFDIS as a platform, tapping into those resources that the federal entities can help provide. It's a powerful tool for that cross-boundary planning and coordination. This is a look at some of the outputs that IFDIS can provide. There's MTT fire spread. It's the time arrival and major paths, providing you some of the projections on the back end. It has the same look and feel as the short-term fire behavior in WFDIS. That's by design. And the user specifies the ignitions, barriers where appropriate. And there's a single set of constant weather inputs for the analysis. Outputs can help you identify your potential spread, pathways, rate of spread, pattern of spread, etc. Then you have burn probability, which quantifies the likelihood a fire will occur with the fixed weather and fuel conditions. And then you have basic fire behavior. It provides you with the basic outputs that you would see based on inputs put in the system by an analyst and weather conditions or parameters that have been analyzed. You'll get flame length, rate of spread, fire line intensity, crown fire. It's a snapshot of the potential fire for each pixel across the landscape. But it's only depicting a head fire, and there are some limitations for sure, but it provides a baseline of information for the planning efforts. And these tools can all be used to compare different fuel treatments across the landscape to meet different objectives. We've provided a qualitative risk assessment based on the Rocky Mountain Research Station GTR 315. It combines the likelihood of fire occurring, the intensity and effects of fire on assets and resources. Conducting the qualitative risk assessment makes land management objectives more effective by characterizing the predicted benefits and threats from fire on several, often overlapping values across the landscape. Field treatments and pre-suppression response planning can benefit from a well-thought-out risk assessment. You can view your risk assessment outputs in the Map Studio to inform your decisions. You can associated model runs and key data layers are available to add to your map. The identify and swipe widgets allow you to understand how the model outputs the HVRAs impact risk. It's a great way to visualize potential treatments, their effectiveness across the landscape, as well as potential impacts for predetermined values. It's a great way to bring collaborators and stakeholders together and run through the Map Studio so you can see what the change and effects can be of your proposed field treatments. Obtaining information about IFTDIS is easy. You can do a simple Google search in IFTDIS and it'll pull up. It's a very robust help system with webinars, YouTube videos, and other reference materials to help provide a baseline of information to navigate the system. With that said, I wouldn't recommend jumping into some of the fire behavior modeling section thinking you're going to learn how to be an analyst overnight. There are some skills that are inherent to having some experiences on the ground. The modeling or outputs are only as good as the data and assumption from the analyst to obtain the outputs. Garbage in is garbage out. It's a familiar term when we're looking at modeling, so just something to be cognizant of. WFDIS. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of WFDIS. WFDIS came about in 2009 based on the federal fire policy. At that point, the federal fire policy indicated that a decision support process was needed to guide and document wildfire decisions. It specifically outlined that managers will use a decision support process to guide and document wildfire decisions, and the process will provide situational assessment, analyze hazards and risks, define implementation actions, and document decisions and rationale for those decisions. The marching orders that were received was to develop a scalable decision support system for agency administrators, use appropriate fire behavior modeling and economic principles and information technology, and support effective wildland fire decisions consistent with resource and fire management plans or guiding principles. Federal fire policy and implementation, the guidance and implementation of the fire policy started it originated in '95 and then updated in 2001 and then most recently in 2009. And then we had the Flame Act, and then from the Flame Act, the Cohesive Strategy. So the intent of WFDIS was for line officers to document their decisions using analytics to provided while meeting the intent of the guiding management plans that was inherent with the NEPA documentation. It was developed to be spatial in nature, and the system is a one-stop shopping approach for sorts to provide relative risk assessment, organizational needs, fire analytics for the decision maker to make an informed decision, providing clear objectives and leader's intent for incoming resources. So one thing I want to put a plug in, and I will hit on some of the stuff coming for next gen, our next application we're building, but WFDIS, although clunky as it is, it was developed in 2009, so it's been around coming on 12 years. So think about how long your phone lasts or other applications or computers that we tend to siphon out about every 3 years. So for an application to last that long, it's coming to the end of its life, but it's done pretty well for those 12 years. WFDIS provides the following advantages over a previous system. It combines the desktop applications for fire modeling into a web-based system for easier data acquisition. It provides an easy way for managers and analysts to accurately document decision-making and allow the results to be all put into one spot for decision content in one point. Provides one decision process and documentation system for all wildland fires. Introduces economic principles into the decision-making, and it allows multiple people to work on supporting documentation at one time. So as we've moved forward, we've been tapping into analysts remotely across the country for various supports. Long-term analysts continue to be a short supply, or analysts in general. So being able to centralize some of those work in that effort or tap into people who are willing to sit virtually and support those fires has been a big asset for folks managing fires. It creates a more consistent planning across the agencies, and it links applications for greater access to consistent data. So folks are using the same data, apples to apples again. So we've got national data sets that are preloaded through infrastructure. We have structure data, jurisdictional boundaries, disturbance history, active fires, fire weather, fire danger. We're tied in with using land fire fuels data on the back end. We use weather data, evacuation data that's been developed. The National Park Service piloted several years ago, threatened and endangered species, and then we link to other applications pulling in data from them, whether it's Irwin or the smoke modeling system. And then we've also moved to the spatial fire planning options that the Forest Service was directed to go towards, but other agencies can use that function as well. So the land fire is the data on the back end of both IFTDIS and WFDIS, and it provides wall-to-wall fuels data nationally along the borders of Canada and Mexico. Our spatial modeling platforms and analytical information wouldn't be possible without this land fire data layers. The fuels layers in the past were built at very localized levels. The discrepancies and human error and inconsistencies as analyses were being run across the boundaries where there were changes in jurisdictions and regions. You think of everybody doing their own analysis or different data coming in, there was a lot of room for errors, and then that gets further exacerbated when the fire behavior models are run on top of those data layers. Landfire provides the data for everyone to have access to fuels information, and it's reevaluated and updated on a set basis. It's the same data service IFTDIS uses for the analysis and planning, and WFDIS uses for wildfire planning and implementation. So WFDIS hosts up 4 different fire modeling to help inform decision-making on what the fire may do and what to expect as a manager. You have basic fire behavior, which is the basic outputs: flame length, rate of spread, crown fire. That's the same as, and then you have short-term fire. So both of these are the same as what's in IFTDIS that I just gave an example of, giving you the, so short-term fire behavior gives you the most predominant path to where the fire will burn. Near-term fire behavior analysis gives you the projected growth out to 3 days using weather parameters and fire spread weather parameters. The fire spread probability, better known as FS Pro, gives the person the probability of where the fire is going to burn based on weather conditions and parameters within the model. All of these tools are taught within S495, the Geospatial Fire Analysis Interpretation and Application, and then there's also some self-study content hosted up on the NWCG Learning Portal at this point. Despite them being introduced in the class, as with any model, there are plenty idiosyncrasies of the models that take a lot of learning and adjusting. So I wanted to show how we can use some of these models to assess fire benefits. Tanya Opperman, a prior RD&A employee, worked with her incident management team to produce this tool that's still in beta, and you'd find it on the YouTube. This is the link here. And then some of the products were up on the RD&A, but somehow they got bumped around, so we can rehost those if there's interest in that. They produced this tool while working on some incidents to help decision makers use fire behavior products to help provide potential impacts, probabilities, and decision space for operational personnel, initiating discussion around the probabilities of success. This is extremely important, especially when we're in TL5 and resources are short. When used right or to inform decision making, on-the-ground analytics can provide a solid baseline to inform decisions. The table is just an Excel spreadsheet that has been developed as a beta tool for assessing fire benefits on an incident, but it could be used on a full suppression incident, and the thought process provides a baseline of how to articulate and include the outputs from analytical tools to inform operational objectives and decisions. It can be used to brief the IC or ops group about what is at risk or whether or not you care that the fire reaches a specific value. The first column is the value. Here we can see that there was a value of a wilderness area, historical cabin, etc. The actual list is long for a 15,000 acre complex on this particular one. The next priority was if you were going to do something, and then you look at some of the susceptibility notes in there just to quantify or put some verbiage in there as to why it's of concern. And then the next columns is what is acceptable fire behavior based on including the weather and fuels and how the fire is going to burn. And then you look at what's the probability that it's going to reach that and what are the impacts. And so it's a great way to pull the analytics together and use it for some of those ongoing briefings, discussions, or bringing in stakeholders or public meetings in that, when you're managing a fire. So as I mentioned earlier, we are in the process. We have a core group of our folks within the RD&A that they have been charged with standing up next generation WFDIS. And so it's WFDIS 2.0. It's going to have a new look. It's going to be more cloud-based, basically coming off of a map product. So there won't be necessarily verbiage that you'll go into. Everything will be done on a map interface. We're going to include the Canadian indices into the fire behavior modeling, which will definitely make the folks in the Upper Peninsula, in the Great Lakes, as well as Alaska, very happy. And also some of those areas where we border into Canada for some of the modeling going back and forth across the borders. There's going to be more of a REST services, plug and play modeling, which means we're going to the cloud. So REST is representational state transfer. It's an architectural style that specifies constraints as the uniform interface, and it's applied to web services to induce desirable properties, performance scalability, sharing of information. We're also going to have some gridded weather for looking at the weather conditions that come in. Instead of using static RAW stations, we'll have more of a gridded weather, which will be site-specific. You won't necessarily be tapped into a RAW station that's 40 miles away. It'll be gridded weather for your point on the landscape, which will really help out with some of the fire behavior modeling. We're also using a GUI, which is a graphical interface. It's a type of interface that allows users to interact with electronic devices through graphical icons and visual indicators. So basically, this next product is going to be a lot more robust and a lot more intuitive to use. And then on the back end, we're also standing up a fire modeling services framework where the modeling for both IFTDIS and WFDIS will go to, so it'll be centralized. The users on the front end will not know any of this is occurring. It's all happening on the back end, but what it does is it makes it so that the platform that's being used for WFDIS, we aren't managing so many idiosyncrasies or potential failures that could come in when we're managing that application. So applications that are not mandated, but they're certainly useful to be aware of. So the RDNA, we've either built or assisted in building these applications, working with the fire lab and actually performing the testing in beta phase, as well as some of the tech transfer, incorporating where appropriate into existing training opportunities. So Wildfires Near Me is an application developed within the RDNA, and it works to keep you informed on fires within an area or areas you're interested in or care about. It's a useful application for private entities, information officers, or concerned entities. It pulls in feeds from several live forces as fire data comes in. It's not an official database, but it's an information service that you can see and set up. So you can actually set up points. If you had a house in Moscow, Idaho, and a house in Boise, Idaho, you can set those points in there with an area that you want to be notified if a fire comes in within 30 miles. It'll start hitting you with notifications that there's a fire and what the name of the fire is and stuff. So it's just an information service. Wind Ninja is a mobile application. It's a micro-scale wind model developed for wildland fire applications, and it's developed to meet specific needs of fire operation personnel. It has a fast simulation time and its simple computing requirements and its easy-use interface. It's hosted off of the RDNA Amazon Web Servicing Framework. It's queuing up the data and downloading the data needed on a service plan, but once it's downloaded, it can be used in the field for information. It's used nationally and internationally by operational personnel. In the last data poll we had in 2018, there were 7 million simulations in 30 countries. Pretty impressive. And we're able to evaluate the potential impacts of wind on a fire for specific location and potential impacts to values, whether there's eddies, wind reversals, or what have you. Then we have the Wildfire Safe app, which Brett Butler was actively developing prior to his retirement. And this is TechnoSilva are the primary developers of this. The safety app is available as a web version, and then they've also got a mobile platform as well. And they're continuing some of the beta testing for this application. The Fire Behavior Subcommittee has worked with Brett to help disseminate the information and beta test it with hotshot crews, engine crews, folks that are very field going to provide some validation. And it has the capability for offline calculations, interactive map interfaces to update data as needed, and it has a fat finger interface for ease of use. National Cohesive Strategy is kind of the backbone that we are trying to tier to as we're driving forward with next-gen WFDIS, and IFTDIS is threaded throughout, trying to really include the all hands, all lands approach, trying to provide these tools for folks to integrate their planning efforts across all boundaries. The overarching challenges identified by the cohesive strategy was to provide some guiding principles, and that was in 2011. Fire management was predicted to become more challenging and complex based on experiences. We continue to see this trend over and over, which we saw in some of the presentations before mine. Climate change fuels management and expanding wildland-urban interface and interface growth, budgets, and missions, and differences among interagency partners and wildland fire communities. How do we bring all that together to collectively manage fire that knows no boundaries? How do we manage as managers across all boundaries so we're all on the same page, so to speak? The strategy was to ensure that values and concerns of the public and governments are accurately understood and reflected. There were and continues to be many underlying perspectives to this situation, encompassing not only the environment and scientific complexities, but the human factors and social political changes. Managing the scientific or the actual ecological side of things is a lot easier than managing all the perspectives and personalities that come with managing the human dimensions. But if we don't manage the human dimensions, we're not going to be effective on the ecological side of things. And as I said, wildfire knows no boundaries. It doesn't recognize organizations' jurisdictional boundaries or responsibilities. There are many times fires will cross private, county, state, tribal, federal lands, threaten values across all landscapes, and values being nondescript in a term. They could be structures or economic values or social political values, sense of place, cultural values. Fire continues to force people to think in terms bigger and broader than their own ownership or jurisdictional responsibilities. The strategy was also very direct in reducing the risk to firefighters and resources who are managing the fire. We need to define risk management and implement risk decision-making and assessments to inform decision-making using the best available science. Provide learning opportunities for communities and individuals to prepare and respond and recover from wildland fire impacts. That recovery piece is becoming more and more important, especially as we have these larger mega fires across the landscape. And embracing the collaborative planning efforts across ownerships despite having conflicting management objectives. The Wildland Fire Management Research Development and Application Program is an active participant in the cohesive strategy, working with the 3 distinct areas of the Northeast, Southeast, and Western regions, and an active member of the Western Regional Strategy. The decision support tools, technology transfer, and application development that RDNA is involved in supports the overarching cohesive strategy as outlined 10 years ago. The tools are helped to inform these decisions across all hands and all lands and ownerships. And I just want to put a plug in that we're going to have the 4th National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy Workshop in Asheville, North Carolina, October 4th through the 8th. And it's truly a workshop where we're going to have people, different breakouts, do some facilitated discussion based on some of the preliminary speakers. So if you get the opportunity to participate, this will be the 4th one in person. Last fall, we held a virtual workshop as well around the cohesive strategy. Some additional non-application tools that are super important to help with decision-making and gathering intel is the Predictive Services site. They have a lot of great information around climatology, weather, fuels, fire danger, and it provides links to several other parent document sites. From there, you can get to the GOES 16, GOES 17 data in some of these tabs. They leverage, so National Weather Service leveraged the GOES 16 and 17 data to help identify where fires were at and where they were going to go. And so they were also able to see when fires were occurring and provide some ways to share information to the public as far as evacuations or other warning messages that went out. And they're also using some of these satellite data layers for tornadoes and that type of thing, that it can be rolled right into fire. And then the Alaska Fire Service, Alaska Fire and Fuels, they stood up their own intel through Mesa West, and they have a very nice set of data hosted here to gather regional perspectives and climatology conditions and references for incoming analysts to get them up to speed quickly, since there is a bit of a learning curve, learning the Canadian system and application to the modeling and that type of thing. So additional non-application resources. So this is a quick snagget of our website for the Wildland Fire Management RDNA, and I just want to hit on, there's the risk management assistance. So if you click on that tab at the top, it will take you to the risk management system and the assistance dashboard. And so there's several platforms and options you can get to with risk management assistance. And so the risk management assistance program or group stood up in 2017 following the Life First discussions, in addition to having a goal to achieve a safer and improved outcomes through structured decision-making. RMA is influenced by the Cohesive Strategy, Shared Stewardship, Dingalac Omnibus Bill, and existing policy and direction. We're assessing risk because of its guiding principles to national and Forest Service policy, and the policy states that wildland fire analysis will consider long-term benefits in relation to risk and short and long-term. Risks and uncertainties must be understood, analyzed, and communicated and managed as they relate to doing or not doing an activity. Risks are analyzed as managers make wildfire management decisions. A full range of fire management options should be considered within acceptable risk levels that are identified in the land management planning processes.
Hey, Tami.
The risk management, yeah.
You guys have so many tools available. It feels like we could, there's just so much to share. We will need to go ahead and wrap up and move on to our next speaker. If you have a...
I'm sorry, I went long. Okay.
That's okay.
Yep. Okay. Yep, that was it. So I was wrapping up with the tools. Thanks, Evita. Sorry to go long.
Yeah, no, that's okay. You might check the chat as we move into the next talk, and I'll encourage you in the chat to answer. There's a question about how relevant these tools are in Canada. And I know you mentioned that, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that in the chat. Thank you so much. It's just great to see these tools and to hear you talk so much about the ways that we can work across boundaries and the all hands, all lands, just using these data sets that are at least national in the US.